One of the most common things we see in small businesses, and I mean genuinely common, like really, really common across nearly every client we work with who is under 50 employees or around that number, is one person carrying two or three roles that have nothing to do with each other, wearing multiple hats. That operations hire who also owns HR, the finance person who somehow became the de facto office manager, the marketing coordinator who also owns client onboarding because someone has to. And to be clear, at the very beginning, very small numbers, this is not just normal, it's really smart. When you have five or six people, everyone wearing multiple hats is a competitive advantage. It's how you get more done when you have less people. You get that people learn across functions, they understand the entire business. There's an energy to it that a larger organization cannot replicate. And it can be a recruiting advantage because employees learn so much in smaller orgs when they have to pitch in and help in ways that they wouldn't in a much larger organization. But at some point, and that time frame is often missed, that same structure stops being an advantage and can start to be a real drag on the business because the work gets heavier and the pace gets faster. And the person who was doing three things adequately is now doing two of them poorly and burning out on the third. Most founders keep the structure anyway, not because they haven't thought about it, but because it makes sense. They feel like it is the fiscally responsible move. Why hire two people when one person is covering it? That's kind of the logic. And that logic is exactly what this episode is about. Because the math on that decision is almost always wrong. My name is Sabrina Baker. I'm the CEO and founder of Acacia HR Solutions. We are an embedded fractional support firm that works with businesses 1 to 500. If you are not subscribed, yet you are managing anything inside of a small business, this is the place to be. So let's talk about a few invisible costs to having people wear multiple hats that I don't think anybody thinks about. And let's talk about why 15 employees is that number. You have to start leveling that out. You don't have to eliminate it at 15. I definitely see clients who have employees working hybrid roles at 50 and it's working okay. But beyond 15 employees, those hybrid roles should be the exception, not the norm. So there are four invisible costs that accumulate over time and eventually become very, very expensive. The first cost is accountability diffusion. When a role isn't someone's primary focus, dropped balls are really easy to rationalize. They say, I didn't know that was my responsibility, or I had the client work this week and I couldn't get to that. Accountability requires clarity of ownership. You cannot hold someone accountable for a role they only partially occupy. The second cost is quality ceiling. People perform at their actual ceiling when the work is their primary job. When it's their secondary or their tertiary job, you get functional output, not excellent output. In a small business, functional might be good enough for a while, a small team, but can you really trust your HR, marketing, or finance to functional long term? The third invisible cost is payroll inefficiency. This one is very direct. If you're paying someone at one rate to do three jobs, you are either overpaying for two of them or underpaying for one. Most of the time, it's the latter. You have a person whose best skill is generating above market value in one lane, and you're diluting that by asking them to cover two other lanes at a lower output level. The math does not work. You're not getting full value from what you're spending. And finally, the fourth invisible cost is burnout. And this one's obvious. It reads as a people problem often, but it's actually really a structural issue. High performers who are stretched across roles don't fail dramatically or all at once. They just check out over time. The job stops being energizing because it never lets them be excellent at the thing they're actually built for. And then they leave. And you call it a retention problem or a recruiting problem when really it was your structure. In the What Breaks at 15 headcount episode, I said roles need to be specialized before that headcount threshold. That's the prescriptive answer. 15 gives you a guide, but again, it's not a universal truth. And you can certainly have a few jack of all trades or jack of several trades beyond 15. But let me give you a diagnostic answer. You need role specialization when the cost of a single person covering multiple functions exceeds the cost of restructuring. So, what does that mean? Well, let me give you 4 signals that the threshold has already been crossed. Signal 1, accountability has no clear owner. If something falls through and 2 or 3 people could plausibly have caught it, you have a role definition problem, not a people problem. Specialization creates single ownership. Without it, accountability distributes into absolutely nothing. Signal number 2, your best people are underperforming relative to their actual capability. If someone that you know is excellent is producing mediocre output, look at what percentage of their week is spent outside of their primary strength. In most cases, you're going to find they're not underperforming, they're performing in the wrong lane. Signal number 3 is you're hiring to absorb work, not to build capacity. If your next hire is someone to help with everything, you are not specializing. You are adding another multi-hat person to a structure that already isn't working. Each hire like that compounds the accountability diffusion and keeps on going. Signal 4, you can't onboard someone effectively because the role isn't defined. If a new hire can't get a clear picture of what success looks like in their first 90 days, it's because the role itself doesn't have a clear shape. Onboarding, which we covered in the last episode, depends on role definition. You cannot build 30, 60, 90-day outcomes for a role that doesn't have defined ownership. Role specialization is not the same as adding headcount. It's a restructuring decision. And here's what it actually involves: a skills framework for every single role you're hiring into. I said in the What Breaks at 15 episode that by 15 employees, you must have a defined skills framework for the roles you're hiring into. We have that download for you. That means before a job is posted, you can answer these questions clearly. What does this person own? What does success in this role look like at 30, 60, and 90 days? What skills are required versus what will we train? And where does this role interface with other functions inside the organization? Most founders post a job without being able to answer any of those questions. The result is a hire that partially fits, gets handed a pile of existing work with no clear shape, and starts filling the role by doing whatever falls through the cracks most often. That's really expensive chaos, just with a different face. The skills framework does not have to be elaborate. It has to be honest. What does this role actually require? Not what would be nice to have, not a description of the last person who did it, but what does the work require? Next is defined ownership, not shared responsibility. In a small business, we all pitch in is a cultural value that becomes a structural liability at scale. Shared responsibility means no one is ultimately accountable. When something breaks, everyone points to someone else, and no one is wrong because the ownership was never clearly defined. Every function in your business needs a single owner. That owner is the person who is accountable for the outcome. not just the activity, the outcome. Other people can certainly contribute to that function, but there is one name attached to whether it works or not. This is what makes the transition from 15 employees to 25 employees so structurally important. At 15, the founder is often the de facto owner of most functions, even if they have people doing the work. At 25, ownership has definitely transferred, has to transfer formally and with clarity about what that means and what authority comes with it. For every function in your business, there should be one name attached to whether the outcome is achieved. Other people contribute, one person owns it. If you can't name that person, the function doesn't have an owner, it has participants. Next is financially modeling behind every role. I covered this in the What Breaks at 15 episode, and I'm going to repeat it here because role specialization decisions are headcount decisions. And headcount decisions have to run through the financials. Before you restructure a role or add a specialized hire, you need to be able to answer, what is your current payroll to revenue ratio? What does that ratio look like if you add this role? And what is the revenue impact of having this function covered properly versus the current situation that you're in? The founders who build roles reactively, posting a job because someone is overwhelmed, they are solving a structure problem or an accountability problem with a salary that might be unnecessary. The hire doesn't fix it, it just costs more. Role specialization done right starts with the work, not the hire. You define what needs to be owned. You build the skills framework for who should own it, and then you model whether the hire makes financial sense at current and projected headcount. That sequence really matters. And then finally, there are role definitions that need to scale forward. So this is the one I probably see missed most often. You define a role based on what the business needs right now. That role gets filled, and then 12 months later, the business has grown. It's a different business, and that role scope has expanded, and that person in it either grows with it or they don't. But the role definition was never updated to reflect what the job actually became. I said in the people infrastructure episode a couple episodes back that every decision you make right now creates a reoccurring obligation. Role definitions are no different. When you define a role narrowly for your current headcount, you build in a restructuring event the moment the business outgrows it. And restructuring around someone who is already in the seat is significantly harder than designing the role correctly at the start. You want to design roles for where you're going, not where you are. That means thinking one stage ahead. What does this function look like at 25 employees, at 40 employees, at 50 employees? Does the role you're defining now create a clean path to that, or does it create a ceiling you're going to have to break through? If you recognize your business in any of this, roles that don't have clear owners, high performers who are stretched really, really thin across functions, onboarding programs that do not work because the role itself isn't defined, this is where the work starts. Not the next hire, but right now, before that person comes in. If you want to hear more about what I have to say around moving small businesses, growing small businesses through people, I would love to connect with you. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just send me a message. Tell me how many employees you are at. We have a ton of more content centered around small businesses, both on LinkedIn and our website. Most founders build reactively. They focus on sales, marketing, and product and treat people as an afterthought until the people start costing them everything. A business where roles are defined before the hire, where ownership is explicit, not assumed, where every person is in the lane where they can actually be excellent. That is a business that scales. Let's build that.